the Bogosity podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the week of August 4, 2024, the podcast that invented the self-driving golf club. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's departmentalize the news of the bogus. Starting off with good news for our energy future, the groundbreaking of a first-of-its-kind nuclear reactor in Wyoming. Back in November of 2021, biggest Bogon emitter went to Michael Mann and a bunch of other climate scientists for telling outright lies about the Natrium reactor, a sodium-cooled SMR that represents the fourth generation of nuclear reactors. The very early kind of nuclear reactor was Generation 1, which included the reactors at Chernobyl and the ones that melted down at Fukushima. Most current nuclear plants are Generation 2, built until the late 1990s. Gen 2 reactors are reliable, economical, and relatively safe as long as you have well-trained operators. Generation 3 nuclear reactors are passively safe, which means the public is safe in a disaster scenario even if the operators do nothing. Several Generation 3 designs are already operational around the world. There's also Generation 3 Plus, which improved designs offering greater safety and reliability during disaster scenarios. The volatile 3 and 4 reactors that we've covered before are Generation 3 Plus. Generation 4 reactors like Natrium go beyond the walkaway safety of Gen 3 reactors, offering other advantages such as low-level wastes that drop below background levels in 300 years or so instead of 250,000, and vastly reduced nuclear proliferation concerns. There's also Generation 5, but those are currently only theory, where any radioactive source above background levels can be safely turned into energy. Natrium is an SMR, a small modular reactor which produces 345 megawatts of electricity, not the 1,000 megawatts of most commercial reactors. The smaller size means they can be mass-produced at a factory and transported for installation at the site. 3 of these will get you above the gigawatt levels of traditional power plants. Natrium's design makes it ideal for upgrading a retired coal plant, which is what TerraPower is doing in Wyoming. Nuclear reactors produce heat, which is generally then turned into electricity by boiling water, just as coal plants do. So most of the equipment, such as the boilers and the turbines, can be reused. So far, this is the only coal-to-nuclear project under development in the world. Natrium puts its heat into a tank of molten salt, which can then be drawn out on demand based on current loads, ramping up output when needed, or dropping it at times of lower usage. Natrium is a sodium-cooled fast neutron reactor, which means it can burn all of the actinides, including plutonium, which is the main proliferation concern, as well as other high-level wastes such as neptunium and americium. This leaves only the low-level wastes as needing to be disposed of, for which the entire module is simply shipped back off to the factory. More importantly, a meltdown is impossible. Since the neutrons are fast, in case of a coolant loss, the increased temperatures slow down the neutrons, which then stop reacting with heavy elements due to Doppler broadening. In other words, no coolant, reactions just stop. No highly trained operators, no fancy safety systems, just the laws of physics. Although it will, of course, use highly trained operators who will be part of the 250 day-to-day employees after the 1,600 workers needed during construction, the total cost will be $4 billion, but that's only because it's a first-of-its-kind installation. The company says that the cost of the nth unit will be less than $1 billion, making it far cheaper than traditional reactors. Construction is expected to take 36 months, which is about half the time it takes for a typical reactor. Construction of the nuclear island should begin sometime in 2026. Eventually, the company hopes to get this time down to less than 2 years, about the same time and at the same cost of a typical gas-powered plant. Factor in the regulatory delays, which will also be a lot lower with future units, and it should be putting power into the grid sometime in 2030. So glad to say the climate crazies didn't get their way, and hopefully this is just the first of many Gen 4 SMRs of different designs that'll be powering our future. Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-aged children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins. From our Deja Vu All Over Again files comes the Encryption Whining Redux, where the FBI dusts off old and worn arguments not seen since 2016 that were old and worn even at the time. But never one to let a good tragedy go to waste, the FBI is now whining that they can't get into the phone of the Trump shooter, and that's why encryption is evil and they need to be able to spy on each and every last little thing we do. Yep. Same thing they did after the San Bernardino shooting, where the shooters had iPhones that they were still able to get into anyway. It's been over 6 years since the FBI acknowledged that it had massively overstated the number of uncracked devices it had in its possession, and promised to deliver more accurate numbers. We're still waiting for those numbers. And yet, FBI Director Christopher Wray is whining about it yet again, even though they've already broken into the shooter's phone. But that's just not enough, according to Wray.
One of the things we've learned in finally getting into his phone, which was also a significant technical challenge from an encryption perspective, but in addition, once we got on the phone, it turned out he was using some encrypted messaging application.
Your reminder that end-to-end encryption doesn't encrypt the ends, just the transmission. Just as you can read your messages in your apps, even encrypted apps, once they're unlocked, so can the FBI.
On this subject, I would say this has unfortunately now become very commonplace, and it's a real challenge for not just the FBI, but state and local law enforcement.
And later on,
so in terms of our ability to access it, we have been able to get into and exploit a number of electronic devices, digital devices, but not all of them yet. And then within his various accounts, we've been able to get access to some of them, but some of them we're still waiting on. Some of them we may never get access to because of the encryption issue, that it presents an increasingly vexing barrier for law enforcement, not just the FBI, but for law enforcement all over the country.
So he's acting like all these criminals out there are constantly one step ahead of the feds, even after they're dead. But I guess we can just trust him when he talks about how commonplace it is, even though last time they lied to us about it and haven't given us any updated figures in 6 years. By the way, if it's such a challenge for state and local officials as well, why don't we ever hear much about it from them? Why is it really just from a long parade of one FBI director after another? But the fact is, this has always been the case. As we covered before, law enforcement investigation techniques date back well before the days of communication devices to where people were talking in secret, with no policeman in earshot and nothing being recorded. For one brief, shining moment, they could spy on everything. And now that it's going away, they don't want to let go of that blatantly unconstitutional power. But traditional techniques are based around the knowledge that you'll never have all of the evidence. Unlike what Sherlock Holmes always said, it's never really about deduction, but induction. When most of the evidence about a crime is impossible to know, or ethereal and gone, or simply is hanging around where no one will ever find it, the skill involved is to look at the evidence that is available and come to the best conclusion. So it just falls kind of flat whenever they screech about going dark or whatever, when it's still the brightest freaking day compared to the times when these techniques were first developed. To top it all off, Wray himself said,
Part of the reason I hedged on whether we have it all is, as you can appreciate in today's world, everybody with a phone has the ability to take footage.
So even if all the communications went dark due to encryption and the FBI couldn't get them at all, they'd still have far more evidence than they otherwise would have due to everyone taking video and sharing it with them voluntarily. The fact is, a 20-year-old, apparently a lone wolf, somehow managed to outfox the entire FBI and Secret Service and came literally within an ear's width of killing a president. That's an astounding level of incompetence that you just can't brush off with, heard their encryption. Especially considering the Secret Service didn't even record their own conversations on the day, continuing the time-honored tradition of covering up their activities just like they did with their J6 communications. But we're not done with Wray yet. Keep listening. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. Well, it looks like we might have another AI lawsuit to keep track of, and since it's brought by the RIAA, you know it's bogus. They sued AI music generators Suno and Udio in separate lawsuits on behalf of major recording labels because they can produce music in the style of their artists. And as we've covered repeatedly, you can't copyright a style. AI music generators can write songs from detailed descriptions and lyrics that you give them. Or they can be completely freeform. For example, if you type in a folk song about the RIAA suing Suno, you might get something like this.
Dim lights in smoky rooms, whispered words in a singer's tune. Half the man's lost in the fight. Music's gone to men in white.
Suno's voice, it told the tale. Songs like whispers, winds that will. The suits came knocking at his door, tied his tunes forevermore.
Money talks, music walks, chained by rules, silence walks, dreams in court, hearts in halt.
So, of course, there are the complaints that this automated tripe is a demeaning of music, cranking out soulless quantity in a churn of regurgitated insipidness. And some say that about AI music, too! They sued Uncharted Labs, the owner of Udio, in the ever-popular Southern District of New York, although they had to sue Suno in the District of Massachusetts. It's the same old that we've seen in AI cases where they claim, quote, "This process involved copying decades worth of the world's most popular sound recordings and then ingesting these copies into the AI model so that it can generate outputs that imitate the qualities of genuine human sound recordings just so they can make a profit. And that's our job! We've already seen courts throw out similar arguments in cases against OpenAI, Meta, and Stability AI. So even though they're separate cases, the two companies have consolidated their defenses from the same international law firm, filing almost identical responses, which is appropriate given that the complaints against them are almost identical. Quote, like a human musician, Suno did not develop its capabilities in a vacuum. It is the product of extensive analysis and study of the building blocks of music. Those genres and styles, the recognizable sounds of opera or jazz or rap music, are not something that anyone owns. Remember that the only justification for copyright in the Constitution is, quote, to promote the progress of science and useful arts, not to help a cartel profit while crushing everyone else under their big legal boot. Quote, our intellectual property laws have always been carefully calibrated to avoid allowing anyone to monopolize a form of artistic expression, whether a sonnet or a pop song. IP rights can attach to a particular recorded rendition of a song in one of those genres or styles, but not to the genre or style itself. Notwithstanding those foundational freedoms, the plaintiffs in this lawsuit seek to shut Suno down. They are a collection of the largest record labels in the world, which collectively dominates the music industry. Again, AI does not work by stitching together a bunch of snippets of pre-existing music. And if you disagree, then here's a simple challenge. Find me where Suno ripped off Money Talks Music Walks. You can't, because Suno has no memory of the songs it was trained on. It's making what it believes music should sound like based on the model weights that are the results of its training. Quote, they frame their concern as one about copies of their recordings made in the process of developing the technology. That is, copies never heard or seen by anyone, made solely to analyze the music and stylistic patterns of the universe of pre-existing musical expression. But what the major record labels really don't want is competition. Where Suno sees musicians, teachers, and everyday people using a new tool to create music, the labels see a threat to their market share. Suno will ultimately prevail in this litigation because the values that copyright law embodies and protects are Suno's values, incentivizing innovation in the service of enabling more expression of more ideas by more people. Plaintiff's lawsuit reflects the opposite values, an attempt to misuse IP rights to shield incumbents from competition and reduce the universe of people who are equipped to create new expression. As in the other lawsuits, inputting songs into AI is fair use. Once again, if AI training isn't a transformative use, what is? Quote, it is fair use under copyright law to make a copy of a protected work as part of a back-end technological process invisible to the public in the service of creating an ultimately non-infringing new product. Congress enacted the first copyright law in this country in 1791. In the 233 years since, no case has ever, not one single time, reached a contrary conclusion. Every single time the question has been presented, and it has been presented over and over and over again, the ultimate conclusion has been that making an intermediate copy of a protected work in the service of generating non-infringing outputs is permissible, not actionable. The outcome has been no different when the copying has been done in the service of creating an ultimate output that competes with the plaintiff copyright owner's own product. And the outputs cannot be infringing either. There is no sense in which they can be construed to be a derivative work. As the output of an algorithm, as the Copyright Office has made clear, it's either public domain or, if sufficient creative input has been provided by the user, then its copyright belongs to the user. Quote, let there be no doubt, the outputs here are, as a rule, non-infringing. The copyright statute speaks to this issue with clarity. It says, the exclusive rights of the owner of copyright in a sound recording do not extend to the making or duplication of another sound recording that consists entirely of an independent fixation of other sounds. even though such sounds imitate or simulate those in the copyrighted sound recording. Even to the extent that Suno's outputs imitate or simulate sounds in the plaintiff's recordings, Congress made the public policy choice to immunize such new creations from copyright infringement liability, so long as they do not themselves contain actual snippets of pre-existing recordings, which they do not. Interestingly, the very reason this statutory provision exists is because the record labels wanted it. Fast forward to 2024 and the age of generative AI. The effect of this legislative compromise is that the outputs of tools like Suno, which do not reprise the actual sounds fixed in any recording owned by any record label, are not and cannot be even prima facie copyright infringements. The outputs generated by Suno are new sounds informed precisely by the styles, arrangements, and tones of previous ones. They are per se lawful. And they're eager for discovery, saying that the RIAA has strong-armed licensees into a no AI policy, and with respect to music startups, who knows? They'd love to find out. Quote, "It goes directly to plaintiffs' long-standing practice of misusing their aggregated copyrights to gain unfair advantage in the marketplace, well beyond what copyright law itself allows. The effect of a finding of copyright misuse is to preclude enforcement of the copyright or copyrights at issue during the period of misuse. With the benefit of discovery, we will show that even setting the fair use issue aside, plaintiffs' pervasive copyright misuse bars their claims altogether." And really, it's just about our right to style. In the same industry that actually brought John Fogerty to court for plagiarizing John Fogerty, they're now bringing algorithms to court for plagiarizing nobody. Quote, "No one owns musical styles. Developing a tool to empower many more people to create music by analyzing on a massive scale the relationships among notes and rhythms and tones to ascertain the building blocks of different musical styles is a quintessential fair use under long-standing and unbroken copyright doctrine. Plaintiff's contrary vision is fundamentally inconsistent with the law and its underlying values." Best of luck to them both. We'll be watching.
Gavel struck and echoes rang. Songs of freedom now restrained. From the heart, a silent cry, a caged bird too tired to fly. Money talks, music walks, times are hard, lines are chalked, broken strings and heavy locks. Creativity took the knocks.
And now it's time to serialize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. Hey, remember last week when we gave it to FBI Director Christopher Wray along with Newsweek? He stated that it wasn't known whether or not Trump was hit with a bullet on J13, fueling cranky conspiracy craziness that was gleefully repeated by the news media, especially Newsweek. So why am I giving it to him again? Well, it turns out I was giving him way too much benefit of the doubt last week. I figured that he was just hiding behind the whole "we don't yet know" thing because the FBI hadn't reached an official determination yet. I focused on Newsweek because they should know better and really only included Wray because of carelessness and for giving them cover. But as it turns out, the FBI knew perfectly well that it was a bullet and Director Wray was lying through his eye teeth. So this week, he gets it all on his lonesome. We know this because of FBI Deputy Director Paula Bates' testimony in the Senate committee hearings.
Is there any doubt in your mind or in the collective mind of the FBI that President Trump was shot in the ear by a bullet fired by the assassin crooks?
Senator, there is absolutely no doubt in the FBI's mind whether former President Trump was hit with a bullet and wounded in the ear. No doubt, there never has been.
Okay.
I've been part of this investigation since the very beginning, and that has never been raised.
You're sure?
Yes.
It wasn't a space laser?
No.
It wasn't a murder hornet.
Absolutely not.
It wasn't Sasquatch.
No, Senator.
It was a bullet.
It was a bullet, Senator. 100%.
Fired by crooks.
Yes, sir.
That hit President Trump in the ear and almost killed him.
100%, Senator.
Okay. Glad we cleared that up.
So I would like, if I may, to upgrade Wray from last week's co-BBE winner to full-on BBE, no holds barred, no questions asked. It was absolutely irresponsible of Wray to deliberately lie and say there was any doubt as to whether or not Trump was hit with a bullet when the FBI knew there was no doubt whatsoever and never was. After the comments, Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "I assume that's the best apology that we'll get from Director Wray, but it is fully accepted." The Mag Hats also chimed in. Laura Loomer wrote, "There are just no words to describe how disappointed I am in my country. Every day I am more ashamed. I can't believe I live in a country where the FBI director pushed a conspiracy theory that President Trump wasn't hit with a bullet. We are surrounded by demons." Marjorie Taylor Greene posted on X, "FBI Director Wray should have never played into Democrats' lies and conspiracy theories, suggesting that it was a piece of glass or fragment that struck President Trump." The FBI also made it clear that it has always considered the shooting an attempted assassination of Trump, not domestic terror or political violence or any of the other euphemisms that have sprung up around it. By the way, I'm still going to throw a brickbat at Newsweek because even though they posted the comments I just read, they still didn't correct their previous story. Bad form, Newsweek. Still, better than ignoring it, I guess. So all of that makes Christopher Wray this week's biggest Bogon emitter. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now let's conglomerate this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week it goes to the Minnesota Supreme Court for an incredibly unprecedented and incredibly dangerous ruling. They said that when you're threatened or under attack, you can't even brandish a weapon if it's reasonably possible to retreat. 10 states have a policy that goes against constitutional, common law, and Supreme Court precedent that says you can't use deadly force if you can possibly retreat, which hopefully will be struck down here before too long, but this goes even further to extents completely unprecedented in American jurisprudence. Early Romero Blevins was threatened by a man and a woman, and the man drew a knife, asking Blevins to come away from surveillance cameras so he could slice his throat. Blevins had a machete at the time, and he pulled it out, and when another man moved towards him, he started yelling and swinging the machete, forcing them to retreat. The state charged him with 2 counts of second-degree assault, a felony, and he was convicted. The appeals court upheld the conviction. The state Supreme Court upheld the conviction 4-2. In an opinion by Justice Margaret Chudich, the court ruled, "We hold that a person claiming self-defense has a duty to retreat when reasonably possible before committing the felony offense of second-degree assault fear with a dangerous weapon, specifically a device designed as a weapon and capable of producing death or great bodily harm. We also conclude that, when viewed in a light most favorable to the verdict, The direct evidence from the security videos presented at trial disproves beyond a reasonable doubt Blevins' claim that it was not reasonably possible for him to retreat. We therefore affirm the decision of the Court of Appeals. And if you want to know how silly this woman is being, just check out her reaction to the idea that looking for an escape requires you to turn away from the people threatening you, opening yourself up to attack. Quote, assessing the sufficiency of the evidence under the standard applicable to direct evidence here, the surveillance videos clearly show that Blevins had room behind him to retreat and could have walked at an angle, keeping an eye on the woman and the two men while he retreated. Yes, this woman is a judge, a state Supreme Court judge, and 3 others agreed with her. In a dissent, Justice Paul Thyssen, joined by Justice Carl Procaccini, wrote, not only is the court's decision divorced from the statutory text and unprecedented in the United States, it also flies in the face of human nature. In the context of cases where a person being attacked does not harm the attacker but merely threatens harm, the better rule is that a fact finder may consider whether a reasonable opportunity to retreat existed as part of the broader and more pertinent self-defense determination of whether the defendant's threatened use of force was reasonable. The court creates an illogical bright-line rule that takes that question away from the fact finder. And basically, he accused the majority of hallucinating when reading the statutes. Quote, notably, the statute nowhere imposes a duty to retreat. It merely requires that the use of force be reasonable. Instead of creating a new bright-line rule in a new context, we should follow the statutory language to determine whether Blevins' threatened use of force was reasonable. It might have been that Blevins' brandishing was unreasonable, although as merely a threat and not actually harmful, it's hard to justify even that standard. But Blevins never even got to make the argument that it was reasonable. And although it might have escalated the confrontation, Blevins never got to make the argument that it could have de-escalated the decision, even though that's exactly what it did. Quote, today, the court takes the law of self-defense into uncharted waters. This new rule is not only unprecedented in this state, as far as I am aware, the rule has never been adopted anywhere in the United States. Until now, the collective wisdom of judges nationwide over hundreds of years has never imposed a duty to retreat before making threats to deter an aggressor. There is a critical difference between using threats in self-defense and harming someone in self-defense. Notably, the legal issue before us is not about the level of force or threatened force that Blevins used, but the court's broad holding today would apply equally well to someone who wards off a potential attacker by brandishing a knife, a lawfully possessed firearm, or a can of pepper spray. Not all threats in self-defense are equally likely to escalate or de-escalate a situation, which is why the question is best left to a fact finder in considering the reasonableness of the threat. The Minnesota AG had no comment, of course. Rob Dorr, vice president of the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus, said, quote, this is one of those scenarios we call bad facts make bad law. Let's say you have a permit to carry and you have a firearm, somebody pulls out a knife, and you draw your firearm out instinctively to respond to that threat. Under old rules, you're completely fine. Under the new rules, you first have to look for a means of retreat before even drawing that firearm out. That is just inconceivable from a mere human reaction standpoint. As for Chutich's ridiculous walk backward at an angle tactic, he pointed out that this is complete hindsight and Monday morning quarterbacking, second-guessing, with the benefit of the point of view of security footage, a split-second life-or-death decision. Quote, duty to retreat is always subjective. That's how the courts have traditionally treated it. Did it have to be the firearm? Was there anything else prior to the use of deadly force? That's where the problem arises with this. Now you have to run that calculus before even deciding to draw your firearm. As stupid, reckless, and arrogant duty to retreat is at the best of times, saying you have to retreat before you can even make the threat is imbecility on a whole other level. And if you have to resort to such boneheaded justifications as, well, you could just walk backward at an angle, then you don't have any justification for any of it. So all of that makes the Minnesota Supreme Court this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Well, that wraps up this you ham-fisted bun vendor edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord or at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Lord Acton. There is no error so monstrous that it fails to find defenders among the ablest men. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.
Money talks, music walks. Times are hard, lines are chopped, broken strings and heavy locks. Creativity took the knocks.